Okay, that's the last time I'm putting a bonk in the intro, don't worry. This is also the last bonk video, so it's okay. And let's just get straight into it, because I'm painting away. This was during the period I was doing these daily sketches, or at least trying to do daily sketches, so I really wanted to be as experimental as possible, so I'm going for this sort of standard like blue sky approach, where starting with some prompts already, which was my previous painting, I again did the invert color trick, and now I'm just painting away and trying to like work out some forms. An interesting thing here is that rather than focusing on actually setting up a lighting direction or anything like that, because really I don't know what I'm thinking at this point. You know, I don't know what the overall image is going to look like at the end, and you can see it starting to form pretty quickly because you know, this sort of approach will give you results very fast, or at least something reminiscent of your final image. But in this case, it's almost like I'm using like a gradient map. So instead of actually putting lighting on these objects to show where how forms are pieced together, I'm using color to basically denote different angles on surfaces. So at the moment, the reason we can understand it is because I have picked this dark, almost black color for basically all the surfaces that are pointing upwards. And as soon as it changes to that green on the side, I've kind of color-coded it so that you know that that green is a side face. So all of these things kind of look like cylindrical columns poking up in the air. And at that point, I just added in a sort of simple depth gradient. So the further down you go, the further into this sort of abyss below, the more pink it gets. And it's interesting because without using lighting, which is often the thing that really helps sell the form of a scene, it really makes it sort of believable. This is getting away, and you know, it still feels like a big space. It feels expansive, and you can understand the forms in it really well. And that's just because I'm sort of color coding the different faces and things in the environment. So you know, what then needs to be added on top? Well, I've sort of established, because I didn't have a strong lighting from any direction, I've established a sort of a global illumination where there are lots of soft light sources, nothing's hitting things directly, and it now appears that basically I've got this glow from the bottom and the glow from above. And the result is that I'm not actually going to add any direct lighting to this piece in the end. I'm really just now focusing on ambient occlusion between objects, and in this case, sort of contrary to what you'd expect, where these pillars might get close to each other and get darker because they're blocking out the light. Instead, because the light source is actually underneath everything, I'm just showing extra light between these pillars. Like, the surface of one of these columns is actually the darkest point, simply because it doesn't have any direct light from below. So it's quite interesting. It was a fun piece to sort of, you know, it feels very alien compared to what we're normally used to. There's none of that standard overhead lighting. Even though there is this sort of faint blue glow from above, it's certainly not like the sky of a standard sunny day that's filling all the shadows with a subtle blue. So it was very interesting, although it then posed a big challenge for trying to put this night in, because there's barely any light to actually give this character, to define it, basically. What can I use? Because it's reflecting the environment. There's the blue above, but then around the sides, it's all this really, really dark green foliage. So the difficult thing here, because it's a very shiny chrome-like armor, typically to show that something is reflective as a surface curves away from you, it's sort of, the angle becomes more extreme. You'd call it a glancing angle. So the light that bounces off and then reflects towards you, it's bouncing a smaller angle before it moves into your eye. You'd call that a glancing angle, and things get more reflective at the edge. It's the Fresnel reflection. So in this case, it just means that the faces that are pointing towards the ground, that are essentially supposed to define the edge of the character, are technically the ones that are supposed to be getting the darkest. And that posed a problem, because having it get dark towards the edge against a dark background meant that I could not read the silhouette. So just back a little bit, you could see I put that slight wash of brighter green underneath. That was just some attempt to try and get some of the darker areas of the character to read, so that there was some sort of silhouette to understand from a distance. And then you can see I've just potentially kept it a bit brighter on the top than is maybe realistic, just to make sure that when you look at the scene, it's actually the first thing you notice. Anyway, I got to a point where I was reasonably happy that it looked like it was sort of integrated into the environment, but was still noticeable on the first read. And here I was just, I was feeling a bit dissatisfied with how sort of bland the environment felt around, because there's very little specific relatable objects in this world to sort of ground the viewer. I'm leaning into the more fantastical side, and so I really amped up the saturation. So that at least, you got the fun interactive element of it just being very very fantastical, very foreign, but beautiful in its own way. And I don't think I touched on this earlier, but the thing to make this then feel believable was to add as much atmosphere as possible. So I had established this sort of color keying thing to show what was the side of an object, what was the top, all that kind of stuff. And now I just needed to add in that extra signifier to show how far an object is away from you. And without a typical light source or a typical environment, I just went with atmospheric perspective, because that's sort of the easiest way to define distance between objects. So this just meant having things fade out into this either pinkish glow from the bottom or very light blue glow from above. And this really separates the foreground out from the background, really adds to the sense of scale. And at this point I had extended some of these roots, or some of these sort of tree-like structures above, and started to treat them as if they were sort of like roots, or just like very low trunks of plants that from above. And because this is supposed to tie in with the animation from before, it's sort of like I don't know if you're familiar with the forest from Nazca Valley of the Wind, but underneath this forest, which appears to have its own forest floor, you break through the floor, and then there's just this long plummet to the ground, filled with these incredibly tall tree trunks. So it's sort of along those lines. I was very aware of that when I was creating this, and it makes for a very nice, interesting and mysterious environment. But yeah, in this case I just wanted to make sure that some of those were really stretching up above to show that they are actually holding up what we previously understood as the ground. And then the rest of this place, I just wanted to add a little bit more interest. So in this case you can see I've roughly composed things onto the thirds of the image. So the bottom left third is where the night is, and then the top right third, you can see this sort of slight little onion-shaped hut almost. I was figuring that it could be sort of like a bulb, one of the early stages of these trees before they grow out and get really tall. And I've just added this slight hint of like some little holes in, perhaps a doorway, perhaps some windows, to sort of make it feel like it could be a place that's been converted into a home of some sort. And I think that did a huge job for making this piece feel engaging, because sure, it kind of looked like that might have been the obvious path for the night to go down before, but now it's really clear that this is where the night is, and almost like a level in a video game. You can see exactly where they would walk, and you can see exactly what sort of destination they would want to go to. That's a point of interest, and it feels very inviting because of it. So, with my point of interest worked out, and me being pretty happy with how the scene read, really the last thing to do was just add the final pop of colour. I just wanted to bring out some of those deeper blues to contrast with the lighter ones. And then I just extended, and I don't have this on video, but I just extended up that top piece, at first simply by selecting and stretching out the pixels I already had. But I just extended it way up and started filling it in with a bit more unique detail, so tangled trees sort of twisting into each other. And this whole piece just became that backdrop where the Bonk Knight falls down for a couple of seconds, and it just very quickly pans past all of these branches and things flying past. The thing I did add was just a few repeating branches that could flick in front of the camera, so I went for this slight 2.5D perspective thing, where the things closest to us were whipping past really fast. I put a middle one in, and then this background was just sliding all the way down. And it worked pretty well. I just had to repeat that sliding effect so that I could have a bunch of branches whip past the camera. I think it really helped sell the distance that the Bonk Knight was falling. And that's it for this piece. Hope that's helpful. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.